The true statesman seems to be one who has made a special study of goodness, since his aim is to make the citizens good and law-abiding men. Good morning, everybody. It's your favorite aspiring revolutionary here, a wandering author, reminding you that we are all the authors of our own lives. As always, my message remains the same. Spend less, live more, earn your freedom with frugality. And today, we're going to begin a discussion concerning the Nichomachean Ethics by Aristotle. We've got our puppy here. We're at Borden Creek. That's where we are, in the middle of Sipsey Wilderness. Maddie is a very excitable puppy, so I may get distracted a couple times during this. And just to clarify, the Nichomachean Ethics is likely named after either Aristotle's father, Nicomachus, or his son, Nicomachus. And the word ethics kind of makes us think of like moral virtue, right? But really, it's concerned with happiness or goodness, in Greek, Eudaimonia, which we've talked about before. And now, this is my first time ever reading through the entire book. I've read like excerpts before, but the things that struck me are very early on in book 1 of the Nichomachean Ethics. Aristotle says that ethics is it's political. So he's writing this book to influence like the politicians of his time, right? And the other main takeaway is that Aristotle, like these concepts, everything that he's talking about, it's all stuff that I was naturally interested in whenever I started this trip. Just like meaning, how to live a good life, how to create a good society. There's a few big differences between Aristotle's approach and the pre-Socratic philosophers. The biggest one is that the Nichomachean Ethics isn't a theoretical treatise. It's supposed to be practical. He says in there that this is a practical book. He even takes a jab at Plato, who came up with the theory of forms. So just to like put that in layman's terms, Plato would talk about goodness as in like what is the universal like aspect of goodness? Like what is it that all good things have in common? Very theoretical stuff that doesn't really have a whole lot of practical value. Aristotle, on the other hand, his entire approach is all based on what can we do in real life. And he has in the first book also, he's talking about it doesn't make sense to try and be too precise with any of these definitions because real life isn't that precise, basically. So eventually we're going to move into the book Politics, which is actually the follow-up to the Nichomachean Ethics. So the Nichomachean Ethics is about an individual's life. Our own personal lives, how to be happy and live good. Whereas politics is about like society as like overall, right? So he begins by saying that the highest good for humans is eudaimonia, also translated as flourishing or happiness. And he defines eudaimonia as a dynamic way of being in action, or the Greek word for it is anarchia, specifically appropriate to the human soul, or in Greek, psyche, at its most excellent, or in Greek, arete. So he's saying that excellence, happiness, it's not passive. It's something that you've got to actively partake in. And he says that Aristotle's ideal person is somebody who is literally good at living life. They would be serious, or spadios, in the same sense that a serious harp player is different from regular harp players. So somebody who's good at life, who is exemplifying happiness, they're going to be serious about living well, in the same way that a professional musician, professional artist would be serious. Similarly, now he does go into like how do we become good, virtuous, flourishing people, and he says that it's a matter of character. Here's a quote from him where he says, "Similarly, we become just by doing just acts, temperate by doing temperate acts, brave by doing brave acts." So it's a habitual thing, right? And he goes, the truth is attested by the experience of states. Lawgivers make the citizens good by training them in habits of right action. This is the aim of all legislation, and if it fails to do this, it is a failure. This is what distinguishes a good form of constitution from a bad one. So again, very early in the Nichomachean Ethics, he's already tying in that this right here's a practical philosophy that is supposed to guide like the highest levels of society. That's book 2, chapter 1. And later in this same chapter, He says, the actions from or through which any virtue is produced are the same as those through which it is also destroyed. You will become a good builder from building well, so you will become a bad one from building badly. So what he's saying is if you're a crappy person, then you're going to become a crappy person if you're doing stuff that crappy people would do. On the contrary, if you are being generous, kind, loving, then you're going to grow and become a generous, kind, and loving person. Now, I think there's a lot that could be said about our current culture and the values that are encouraged in our current society, namely selfishness, arrogance, really a lot of really bad stuff. So what does that tell us? Well, Aristotle would tell us that we're building a society of bad people. Now in book one, he's the distinguishing between the practical and theoretic philosophy, taking a jab at Plato and his theory of forms. Plato's philosophy would take things like goodness and abstract them to discover what all good things share in common. Now in chapter 2 of the Nichomachean Ethic, Aristotle's assertion is that eudaimonia, or happiness, is the ultimate aim of all arts and crafts. Basically, anything that anybody does is truly trying to help them become happy. And it also should be the goal of politics, because what is beautiful, or kalos in Greek, and divine, or theos in Greek, for an individual is inferior to what is beautiful or divine for a people or ethnos. So he's saying that ultimately the whole society matters more than any individual person. Again, something that has struck me throughout my studying of Aristotle's Nichomachean Ethics is how much of this stuff is similar to things that I was already talking about without ever even reading Aristotle. So, for me at least, it's made me realize that I'm not alone. A lot of the topics that I've been talking about, humans have been talking about since the dawn of democracy, at least in Athens. So, in chapter 5 of Nichomachean Ethics, Aristotle goes on to describe 3 distinct ways of life that people typically associate with happiness. The first is like hedonism, chasing dopamine. That's what most people view as happiness. And he's got a pretty savage line to describe this one. He goes, the generality of mankind show themselves to be utterly slavish by preferring what is only life for cattle. So, Aristotle does not mince words there. Chasing nothing but pure pleasure, that's only suitable for cattle, according to Aristotle. And then he's got 2 other ways of being that most people tend to fall into. One, you've got the path of honor. Now, for me, honor, like the word, kind of evokes these feelings of like goodness, right? But whenever you actually read the Nichomachean Ethics, to me it sounds more like these are people that want to, he says this is the aim of politics, but it's also too superficial to be the good. I basically think for him that honor is like getting other people to exalt you, to like praise you, like kind of social status basically. And then he's got the way of contemplation, which is just about thinking basically. He condemns, he has 2 other methods of life that he condemns. One is the life of money making, saying that it's unnatural and the only reason that we go after money is because of what money can get us. So it's an intermediary good. Happiness, then, in life includes the virtues, and it also includes self-sufficiency, or autarkeia. Not the self-sufficiency of a hermit, but of someone with a family, friends, and community. In this section of the first book of the Nichomachean Ethics, I felt personally called out because I have had a lot of challenging experiences in our current society, to the point that I very much have felt like withdrawing from it, right? And I know there are other people out in the world that share similar thoughts because I've talked to them. But the only way, according to Aristotle, that would make life, quote, choice-worthy and lacking nothing is if you do involve friends, family, a sense of community overall, right? And then here is a quote from the 5th chapter. And sorry there, I know, I'm trying to keep an eye on my puppy here. She is absolutely going nuts with all this. But, and one might suppose that virtue is the end, but even virtue is incomplete, since it appears possible to possess it while you are asleep, or without putting it into practice throughout the whole of your life. And also, for the virtuous man to suffer the greatest misery and misfortune, though no one would pronounce a man living a life of misery to be happy. So again, the Nichomachean Ethics isn't about what's morally right. It's about how to live a life that's worth living, literally, which is a topic that I've been discussing since the start of my journey here. So that's interesting to me. And he goes on, like at the conclusion of book 1, to talk about mankind, so like a human's ergon, which it's like their work, like their reason for being. What is a human's purpose? And he goes that it's got to involve logos, our reason, because that's what separates us from animals. And it also needs to be an act of being at work, or anarchia, not merely potential happiness. And finally, he goes on to say that it's something that requires a lifetime. And here are 2 quotes, both of them equally savage, I think. So he goes, "The good of man is the active exercise of his soul's faculties in conformity with excellence or virtue. Moreover, to be happy takes a complete lifetime, for one swallow does not make a spring." Nichomachean Ethics, Book 1, Chapter 7. And then we'll conclude with this one. He's talking about athletes at the Olympics, and he goes, "It is not the most beautiful or strongest who are crowned, but those who compete." So, what he's saying is just being virtuous, if you're not engaging with the wider world, it's not sufficient. So that's actually something that spoke deeply to me, because I travel like a ton, but as you can tell, like the dog over there is one of the few things that I hang out with, right? It wasn't always that way for me. I used to be very social. Then I had bad experiences with people. But if we take Aristotle's advice, we can't let that discourage us. So, if you've had bad experiences with people, I highly encourage you to not let those color your perception of everybody. Reach out to people, try to talk to them. But yeah, so tomorrow we're going to actually start talking about the history of Greece. And we've got some great quotes from Thucydides to go over. And again, it's going to be talking about inequality. I mean, I keep doing the research for this stuff, and I don't mean to find stuff, but people have been talking about the same issues that I'm discussing today since literally the dawn of human civilization, or at least Western civilization. I've got a feeling if we looked hard enough at stuff that happened over in the East, we'd probably find a similar pattern. But that's really all I've got for you guys today. So this is your favorite aspiring revolutionary here, coming at you from Borden Creek in the middle of Sipsey Wilderness, reminding you that we are all the authors of our own lives. As always, my message remains the same: spend less, live more, earn your freedom with frugality. Until next time, what are you guys doing in order to inspire, uplift, and empower your community today? Because this world isn't changing unless we all do our part. You can count on me to do mine daily. Love y'all.